Hello everyone. I played about 40 to 50 hours of Modern Warfare 2 around the time of the game's launch, and recently I came back to the game and was pleasantly surprised to find that plenty of people are still playing it. At the time of recording this video, I've only ever played 2 Call of Duty games, and MW2 was the first. It was my entry point into the franchise. You see, I missed out on what many people refer to as the golden age of Call of Duty. However, this wasn't due to a lack of interest. In fact, gameplay commentary videos of the original Modern Warfare series and the early Black Ops games were among the first gaming videos I ever watched on YouTube. Back then, I unfortunately just didn't have the means to play those games. As time went on, I ended up losing interest in the franchise. There were numerous games that seemed to adopt a more futuristic theme, and this didn't appeal to me as much as the realistic military aesthetics of the earlier titles. By the time I got around to building my first decent gaming PC, I had pretty much stopped thinking about Call of Duty altogether, with one very notable exception.
126 actual. Target is in the main house. You have execute authority.
Bravo 6. Going dark.
Modern Warfare 2019. The more grounded and jarringly realistic tone of this game appealed to me. But at the time that I built my PC, MW 2019 was already a year old. The hype had died down, and I ultimately ended up playing other games. Fast forward a couple years, at some point in 2022, I remember seeing Modern Warfare 2 pop up in the Steam store. This wasn't a title that I had been keeping up with. In fact, I don't even think I ever watched a trailer. But when I saw it, I remembered how MW 2019 had interested me. This was the first time that I had both the desire and the means to play a newly released Call of Duty game. So, as a huge latecomer to the franchise, here are my thoughts on Modern Warfare 2 2022. First, let's talk about the campaign. The campaign was the first thing that I did after buying the game, and while I have no clue how it stacks up to the original Modern Warfare 2 campaign, or against other Call of Duty campaigns in general, I found it to be a solid experience overall. Heavily scripted levels, cinematic cutscenes, and a good soundtrack all work together to make you feel like you're in the middle of an action-packed war movie, which is pretty much what I expected. As far as gameplay goes, most of the levels are pretty fun. My only complaint is that certain levels do have an abundance of armored enemies that feel like complete bullet sponges. These guys can be a pain to deal with, especially if you're using a weaker gun, since at times it feels like they're capable of taking almost an entire mag of 5.56 to the chest before going down. But besides those dudes, I really have nothing else negative to say about the gameplay of the campaign. Playing through it for the first time probably took me between 5 to 7 hours in total, and there's a little bit of replay value that you can get by going back and chasing achievements. Most of the gameplay that you've been seeing on screen is of me going back and attempting to complete some of these achievements. As far as the game's story goes, I think 90% of it is solid. There's really only one part that I take issue with. If you don't want spoilers for the story, skip forward a few minutes. So the game starts out with Task Force 141 carrying out a missile strike on a guy named General Orbrani, who is the leader of the Iranian Quds Force. That sets up the main antagonist of the game, Major Hassan Zyani, an officer in the Quds Force who is determined to seek revenge against the United States. Now, about halfway through the game, TF-141, working with Mexican Special Forces and Shadow Company, conduct an operation to capture Hassan, who has been hiding out in Mexico using a cartel for protection. For part of this operation, you control an AC-130 and provide close air support to the guys on the ground, and these AC-130 levels are among my favorite levels in the game. The operation is successful, and 141 actually ends up apprehending Hassan, but then they basically just talk to him for a few minutes and then let him go. Apparently, they don't have enough to take him into custody. This just ends up feeling weird because at this point in the game, we know that Hassan has been working with cartels and basically planning a terrorist attack. He acts like Because he's a major in the Quds Force, it would be a big problem for us if we detained him illegally.
I'm a hostage here. This is illegal.
You're a prisoner of war.
Iran is not at war with Mexico. I've broken no laws. These men and their commanders are the lawbreakers.
It's cautioned that killing Hassan would be an act of war and keeping him would be illegal. This just feels inconsistent, because keep in mind, we dropped a cruise missile on the leader of the Quds Force at the very start of the game. Was this not already an act of war? There's no way that just detaining Hassan would cross a line that hasn't already been crossed. Also, if they knew they couldn't detain him, why carry out a major operation to capture him in the first place? Why not wait to give the green light until you have more solid evidence? Anyways, I don't want it to seem like I'm being too harsh on the campaign here, but the whole catch and release thing with Hassan seems so weird to me that I felt like I had to mention it. Like I said before, I think most of the story is really solid, and from what I've seen online, it looks like the campaign was generally well received by the player base at large. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said for the game's multiplayer. Having played this game for a while now, I've come to find out that this game's multiplayer was a pretty divisive iteration on the Call of Duty formula. But before talking about the more divisive aspects of the multiplayer, I want to just take a moment to discuss my individual experience. I find the multiplayer gameplay and progression to generally be very satisfying, largely because I'm almost always making progress towards something. Even if I have a few matches where my team loses or I don't have the greatest KD, there's a good chance that I made some progress towards leveling up my weapons, unlocking camos, or completing some other challenge. I feel like this is important because I view this game as a relatively casual experience. I don't have to be super committed in order to accomplish something. I can spend just 20 minutes playing a couple of matches and still have made meaningful progress. Overall, I've had a great time with the multiplayer, and I'm still playing it today. But if you were to look at what most people have to say online, you would be forgiven for assuming that MW2 multiplayer is something that no one enjoys. As I understand it, MW2 tried to slow down the gameplay a little bit in the hopes of making the experience feel more realistic or tactical. Relative to previous titles, movement speed was made slightly slower and less complex, while time to kill was decreased. From what I've seen online, these are the main things that people took issue with. To a lesser extent, I've seen complaints about the perk system and the implementation of the gunsmith. The complaints about movement are really confusing to me, because when I look at gameplay of the Golden Age games, the games that many people consider to be the best in the franchise, the movement in those games looks more similar to MW2 than to other recent COD titles. I never saw really fast-paced, advanced movement as a hallmark of Call of Duty. When it comes to TTK, I can see both sides of the argument. On one hand, a longer TTK makes camping less effective, which I can certainly appreciate. I don't have a problem with people who camp, but it can lead to some very boring games. On the other hand, I feel like the game's low TTK is a big reason why pretty much all of the weapons feel viable. As I've been leveling my weapons, I've yet to encounter any guns that feel particularly underpowered. The perk system is something that I don't really have a strong opinion on. Because I started in MW2, I have no reference for how perks should ideally work in a Call of Duty game. I do fully agree with the complaints about the implementation of the gunsmith. 75% of the attachments in the game seem like they come with a penalty to ADS speed, which is a major issue because the low TTK makes ADS speed one of the most valuable stats to have. Many attachments, including optics, can feel like a detriment to your gun build. This is especially unfortunate when you consider that in other areas, the game tries to be more realistic, while at the same time, many attachments commonly used in real life are not worth using in the game, and iron sights often feel preferable to red dots or other optics. Now, I consider all of these issues that I've mentioned thus far to be pretty minor things at the end of the day. The biggest negative aspect of my multiplayer experience has actually been something that's not at all exclusive to Modern Warfare 2, and that is the game's implementation of skill-based matchmaking, or SBMM. I believe that all recent Call of Duty titles have implemented SBMM in pretty much the same way, and if you've played any of these games, you're probably very familiar with the SBMM discussion. It seems to always be one of the hottest topics within the Call of Duty community. I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail here, because there are already a million other videos covering this issue, but I felt like I had to at least mention it, because even as a relatively inexperienced player, it's already my biggest multiplayer pain point. The matchmaking is very reactive to your recent performance. All it takes is 1 or 2 good games, and you're at risk of being thrown into a guaranteed loss. But after a few bad games, the matchmaking always seems to take pity on you, and you get thrown an easy win. It seems like the vast majority of my games are part of this predictable cycle, and it ends up making many losses feel inevitable, while also making some wins feel less valuable. I feel like if recent performances weren't weighted so heavily in the SBMM equation, matches would feel more organic, and the multiplayer would feel a lot better. And that's pretty much all I have to say about my Modern Warfare 2 experience. If you're a COD veteran, I would love to hear your opinion on how this title stacks up to other games. And if there's anything in this video that was factually incorrect, please feel free to correct me. Even if you weren't the biggest fan of MW2, I found it to be a pretty fun game. And the fact that it's succeeded in getting me invested in Call of Duty as a franchise has got to be worth something. That's all I've got for this video, but I hope to see you in the next one.